Welcome to week 5 of Mpai 600 here at Georgetown University School of Continuing Studies. Just the only announcement, current events I have, there's a lot of, we're now seeing some documentation and some good articles on the Capitol Hill intelligence failure. What went wrong, why the police didn't respond, why there wasn't a greater response. And two articles I just want to recommend that you read is the Newsweek article that came out this past week on the Capitol Hill failure, and it goes time by time or timeline exactly what happened, and then the New York Times, which covers the organizational issues related to the Capitol Hill intelligence failure. So I would recommend going through those. I will also just say that if you want to do your final paper or presentation on the Capitol Hill intelligence failures and apply all the lessons that we learned from the course to that, I'd have no problem with that. So week 4 review. I know there was a lot, big part for the paper, and I'll give you a little bit more guidance on the paper coming up. But obviously, Iraq WMD, there was collection failures. You saw the documentary on Curveball. You saw inadequate knowledge of Iraqi chemical weapons. These were basic collection failures. We saw analytical failures in the aluminum tubes and the groupthink surrounding whether it's the aluminum tubes or their biological warfare program. We saw organizational failures. As I mentioned in the lecture, if George Tenet is the guy in the room and he says slam dunk, you can do all the red teaming and all the competitive analysis on that respect, but if he's the guy in the room and he says that, that's an organizational failure. If all your intelligence is dependent on the biases of one person, that essentially is an organizational failure. And then finally, the policy interference, that Rachel Maddow goes into pretty good depth on that. I'll let you decide whether you think politicization had an impact or what the impact it did have on the Iraq WMD failure. You could go both ways on this. There were certainly failures, and I ask you to write about it, that the intelligence community did outside of the politicization perspective. But would that intelligence have bubbled up to a war-making perspective without that political impact? I'll let you decide. So 9/11. Was 9/11 an intelligence failure? This is a debatable point. Not all bad things that happen are intelligence failures. And before I saw the NSA documentary, I might agree with you that 9/11 was not an intelligence failure. Just, a group of shadowy terrorists coming to the country in a free country where we don't live in a police state, that's difficult. However, after I watched the NSA documentary, you saw that it was known that there was communication between a known Osama bin Laden safe house and San Diego internal to our country. And for whatever reason, apathy, clearance issues, bureaucracy, organizational issues, that information was not disseminated down to where it could have stopped. And when we're talking about 9/11, we talked a lot last week, and I want you to think about that this week, is what are the mitigating circumstances that could have prevented 9/11? I talked about things in civil aviation and other aspects, but really the threshold for an investigation. If there had been an investigation into the 9/11 plotters, no doubt that the 9/11 plotters would have been discovered, and you wouldn't have been able to conduct a 9/11-like attack. So the threshold to start an investigation was the big issue. So what do you do if bin Laden determined to attack in the U.S.? That was brought up in the documentary. Let's say President Bush, you brief that to President Bush, and he goes back to you and says, okay, what do you want me to do? The reason I bring this up is, as an intel person, whether you're briefing these huge strategic issues or you're talking about cyber security issues in your business unit or the Capitol Hill Police, if you have intel related to that, the bottom line is you have to connect that intel to a reasonable action. So if George Bush comes up to you and says, okay, what do you want me to do? How bad is this intel? Do you want me to invade Afghanistan? Do you want me to shut down civil aviation? What do you want me to do? You need to go into the room prepared for how intel can provide information to specific actions, to mitigation recommendations. So that's something to consider just for not just for this class, but for life in general. Organizational issues. I just talked about the NSA piece. The boxes weren't communicating right, right? NSA is here. There's information down here related to the 9/11 plot, but because NSA is reporting up here, they're certainly not reporting to the San Diego Police Department. That connection was not made. A lot of people say it's because again we're organized in different in a manner that didn't facilitate good information flow, um, and that was one of the issues of 9/11. And finally, where along the chain could federal state government have prevented 9/11? You saw in the Fusion Center documentary, uh, they pulled over a 9/11 hijacker. If the fusion centers had been operating or there'd been more information, they would have figured out this person was on a watch list and they might have unraveled the 9/11 conspiracy. Um, there's several places, again, I talked about in the lecture, where better information processes regarding to no-fly lists, watch lists, local law enforcement, uh, treasury monitoring large money flows coming in and out of the country. All these could have tipped off a potential increased investigation. So paper two, and then if you're doing the briefing is this Thursday. So a couple of things. Strategic paper, you have the goals of it, will allow you to choose intelligence issues and use multiple case studies, or either choose an intelligence issue or use multiple case studies. So if you want to go in depth on a case study that we talked about, 9/11, Pearl Harbor, etc., you can do that. Or if you want to go in depth on an issue, politicization, groupthink, what have you, and show how groupthink was impacted in multiple case studies, I'll allow you to do that as well. All right, so you can do it. You can go about this one of two ways. If you are going to do a case study outside of class, just let me know. I'm probably familiar with the case study, but I just want to make sure you're on the right path before you start doing some research on it. So the key thing is do not give me a laundry list. Do not give me 8 intelligence failures related to whatever issue you're talking about. Describe what you think was the primary intelligence failure out of the multiple issues. Argue that point and show me what reasonable mitigation circumstances could have done to prevent the catastrophe. All right? Do not give me a laundry list. Do not give me 10 reasons why Iraq WMD failed or 10 reasons why 9/11 happened. Couple of things that you can choose. And again, do not go down collection, analysis, politicization and stuff. Choose one of those. But here are potential examples that you can choose. Failures in collection. Pearl Harbor, we did not know the location of the aircraft carriers. Yom Kippur War. Over-reliance on Narwan, that was talked about in the documentary. The Iraq War, I talked about curveball and the over-reliance on bad human. You could easily do a paper that if you believe that the Iraq WMD failure was a result of bad human intelligence. Failures in analysis, Pearl Harbor, we talked about that extensively in week 3. The confessions, we talked about that extensively before, where there was confirmation bias and vividness bias that led to the false confession or false conviction. And then Iraq WMD, the groupthink surrounding areas like, you can talk about negative evidence. You can talk about the groupthink surrounding the areas of the aluminum tubes. There's many ways you can talk about failures in analysis in Iraq WMD, however you want to do it. Politicization, we talked about Iraq WMD, the policy interference, the confessions. Arguably, the reason why those bad convictions happened is because there was a lot of interference to get convictions, to get people arrested. And then 9/11, we talked about the interface just a second ago between lawmakers or political leaders and the intelligence community. Organization, we talked about the NSA documentary just a second ago. Pearl Harbor, at the federal level, again, information was known at the federal level, but it was not disseminated down to the commanders on the ground, similar to that 9/11 effect as well. was that the primary factor that led to the Pearl Harbor intel failure? Um, and then the fusion centers, you could talk about the inability or the fusion centers designed to solve that 9/11 problem that I just talked about, where you're pushing federal information down to the local, state, and local law enforcement. So there's a myriad of ways you can go about this, but the important thing is that you choose. Do not give me a laundry list. Do not give me a laundry list. And then just because again this class is so compressed, we don't get to stop. You don't get a week off to do a paper. We go right into the counterterrorism case study. So Fort Hood, fortunately, the first Fort Hood shooting, underwear bombing, Boston, and then the EU, ISIS. Um, I'll probably update this section a little bit later and talk more about domestic intelligence extremism. The readings of Fort Hood shooting, the Boston Marathon bombing, excellent documentary on the Christmas Day bomber, and another excellent on the EU terrorism. And the question that you have is, despite the billions, trillions, depending on how you calculate it, we've spent on counterterrorism, why do we still have these failures? These ISIS failures, these intelligence failures, the Boston Marathon attack. So if there's any issues, let me know. And I look forward to the presentation this Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if there's issues, let me know.